Good afternoon, everyone. You're all very welcome to our webinar today on understanding overthinking in depression, OCD, and generalized anxiety disorders. My name is Dr. Susan Brannick. I'm a clinical psychologist and clinical director here at AWARE, and I'm joined by Professor Mark Freeston, who I'll introduce more formally in just a moment. So just taking a minute or so to get settled, allowing people to join, and we'll get going very shortly. So welcome again to those joining. As I was saying there, my name is Dr. Susan Brannick. I'm clinical director here at AWARE and delighted now to be joined by Professor Mark Freeston, who is a research director in the Doctorate of Clinical Psychology at Newcastle University. So just a brief note on our webinars for those of you who aren't familiar. We meet on the second Wednesday of every month talking about a range of mental health topics around depression, anxiety and related conditions. So as you might know, AWARE offers a whole range of support in terms of education programs, support services like our groups and our phone line, and more recently counselling. So do have a look at our website for more information if you're interested in finding out more. So that's aware.ie. Just in terms of our conversation today, thank you all for joining. I think it's going to be a really interesting topic, so please do feel free to ask questions as we go. We'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. And my apologies in advance if I don't get to your direct question, but we'll do our best to work through them. So do put them through as we're talking today. And as ever, if anything kind of arises for you in the course of the webinar that you're left with, maybe reaching out in terms of your own social networks or with your mental health professional, if anything's left resonating with you. So just a little note then to welcome Mark. So Mark, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Mark's main interests are in obsessive compulsive disorder, so OCD, and generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, and other disorders dominated by intrusive thoughts, worry, and rumination. So Mark and his team are working on extending the psychological models of these disorders, I suppose ultimately to develop a knowledge base that will enable treatments to become more effective for those who currently benefit little with existing psychological treatments. A bit of a mouthful, but a very laudable aim, Mark. So really delighted to have you here today. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself beyond that, or if you wanted to say anything before we begin.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Yes, I'm a career clinical researcher. I've been doing this from about 35 years, and so all through my career and trying to understand different presentations of anxiety. I worked for a long time in clinical settings. I'm now uniquely in the university, but I have lots of very good research students researching different aspects of anxiety in relationship to neurodiversity, climate change, as well as trying to understand features of OCD and a generalized anxiety disorder.
Great, thank you. A huge range of skills and experience. So thank you so much for joining today, Mark. I wonder, maybe it's probably best to start off by, obviously as AWARE is the national charity for supporting those with depression, but maybe people watching are quite familiar with depression, but maybe if we start off by maybe starting to, I guess how we might define OCD or GAD, and also kind of defining overthinking.
Right, okay, so obsessive compulsive disorder is the presence of obsessions, which are thoughts, and these are thoughts that come into one's mind without one wanting to. They're not pleasurable, they're unwanted, they're sticky, they're difficult to get rid of. They really intrude into one's consciousness, often at times that are really upsetting. They come at the worst possible moment. And it's or compulsions. And compulsions are essentially behaviors that people feel, compelled to do, that they need to do them, to stop bad things happening, to put things right if you think something has gone wrong badly. They can be time consuming. They're not pleasurable. It's not about wanting things to be in a certain way. It's the fear that if things are not done in a certain way, something bad will really happen to oneself or someone else.
Mm. That's really key, isn't it? So it's not just about order and
No.
yeah, laying things out. It's actually that. So it's related to the thought, isn't it? So that fear that something bad will happen if I don't do X or Y.
Yeah, and there are some people who currently, with OCD, who currently don't report thoughts.
Yeah.
And the way that we think about that is, right, if you think about it, some people who might have a problem with locking doors because they
Mm.
think something bad will happen if they don't lock the door. So rather than waiting for thoughts about having not locked the door to occur and then lock the door, if they know they're going out, they'll spend a lot of time locking the door.
Yeah.
So there are some people who probably used to have thoughts, but now are doing lots of things to prevent having thoughts.
Mhm. Sure. Yeah. So that, yeah, so it kind of speeds it up in a sense,
Yeah,
or avoids the thought.
so it's sort of preemptive. So
Yeah.
rather than waiting to respond to the thoughts, we'll get it dealt with before we have the thoughts.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I guess maybe the other key part in OCD is that not only will something bad happen, but I'll be responsible for it in a lot
Yes.
of cases.
Yes, so responsibility is a big issue, and it's sort of been defined as responsible for harm to self or others. And this could be in the real world, but it could also be in a moral world, or it could be in a religious world as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then in terms of GAD, how would you define that?
GAD is what if? It's wondering about what if. And GAD is called generalized anxiety disorder because it means that people will worry about things that are important to them. And generally, worry is about what might happen in the future. Sometimes it's about what might happen in the future because of things that have happened in the past, but
Mm.
it's really understood as future oriented. And it's called generalized because it will be whatever is of importance in the moment. And we know that worry is linked very much to people's values.
Mm.
So if your family is a value, you'll worry about your family. If the climate, uh, if the uh, if the ecosystem is of one of your values, you'll worry about that. If your role as a parent, as an employee, as a friend, as whoever is important to you, you're likely to worry about that.
So it's the, I guess, as you say, kind of tied to what matters to you and the what if, and it's sort of
Yeah,
future
very much
focused. And
so.
like, yeah, and I guess maybe then kind of overthinking and depression, it tends to be past focused, doesn't it, in terms of rumination?
Yes, so in terms of depression, it's often what we call counterfactual thinking. So it's, well, if that hadn't happened, or why did this happen? What if it hadn't happened? What if
Mm.
I'd acted differently? Why did that occur? And so it's trying to figure out how that why things are the way they are, why I am the way that I am. And what's interestingly in some of our research a few years ago, we see people sort of looping between what if that hadn't
Mm.
happened, or why did that happen, but then looping into, but what if this happens? And so people are moving from sort of past oriented to future oriented types
Mm.
of overthinking.
Yeah. It's a lot of thinking, isn't it?
It
And I
is,
guess
yeah.
by definition, then I maybe the overthinking, when is it too much? When, and these are, I know these are kind of bigger questions, we'll kind of tackle them as we go through. But I suppose for someone thinking, yeah, but I'm problem solving, or yeah, I'm just reflecting on what's happened. So I guess what are the signs that it's tipping into
Yeah.
overthinking?
I guess when it stops you getting on and doing things, and that's
Yeah.
what it has an impact on functioning. So yes, I'm problem solving, but if all the problem solving only happens in a person's head and they never get on to action, then that's not helpful. If it's distressing, and I guess one of the ways that I think about it is, and I use in my training a lot on worry, you don't hear people say when they go into work and they're talking to colleagues, oh, I had a really good worry last night. It was great. Because it's not. Worry is a horrible feeling. So even though it might seem that it's trying to do something, it's really figuring out, is it meeting its goal, which might be it shows that I care, or that I'm problem solving, or that I'm trying to motivate myself. But if someone feels really tied up in knots and they feel really anxious and they feel paralyzed, then that's not working. So whatever it's trying to do, it's not actually working.
Yeah. So it's not actually solving anything. And I
No.
guess the indicator for someone might be kind of in their body in terms of how they feel.
Absolutely.
A sick stomach or a racing heart or maybe tension. So knowing that it's not just neutral thinking, it's feeding into a loop of distress potentially that it's seeking to avoid.
Yes. And I think one of the ways to think about it is because worry is often about the future. And worry is the difference between worry and problem solving is the first step in problem solving is define the problem. Whereas worrying is often so many steps in the future. What if, and what will happen then, and then what will I do? And so if a problem can't be defined, then we can't problem solve.
Yeah.
And so if something that it is somewhere too far in the future, then that's more likely to be worry than problem solving.
That's a helpful kind of indicator, isn't it? So if it's quite remote or quite distant, it's more likely to be worry. And I guess so you've done a lot of work on your model of intolerance of uncertainty. Maybe if we start with worry, how would you, again, there's probably like 7 hours of a webinar. So it's a bit of an overview for people to get a bit of a sense of it, maybe of how that model, the psychological model that kind of seeks to explain it, how that might work in worry, maybe.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing to say, there's a lot of different models of worry, different ways of understanding it. And I wrote an article a couple of years ago that was, what if we have too many models of worry? And I identified at the time 9 different models, and they all overlap to some degree. And there's some evidence for all of the treatments based on them being effective. But I guess the one that I've been most associated with is the intolerance of uncertainty model that started off in Quebec. We started developing that in the early 90s. My initial colleagues and we stopped working together for a number of years. We've sort of kept in touch, and we're just finishing an article that looks at the history of intolerance of uncertainty. And it started off with a hunch, so a clinical hunch from working with people who were worriers, who had generalized anxiety disorder, that they had difficulties with not knowing what's going to happen. And this became defined as intolerance of uncertainty, and difficulties in the sense it was distressing. They didn't like it. It didn't feel good. It got them so it had an emotional component. It just didn't feel good. It has a somatic component, so a body component that myself and my current colleagues have worked much more on, which is sort of this feeling in the gut. It's not necessarily a feeling it's not a spike of anxiety. It's a grumble of uncertainty, and people often locate it in their gut. Yeah. So I would say it's not butterflies in your stomach. It's sort of angry wasps in your stomach.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's got that same sort of physical location.
And discomfort, I guess.
And very much discomfort. And it's got a behavioral component, which acts in two ways. One is that people will over-engage. They'll do more and more things that appear to be helpful, but
Mm.
ultimately don't seem to be. So like lots of information seeking, lots of
Yeah.
checking stuff out, asking people for information, making lists, lots of plans, revising plans. But interestingly, these are often plans that don't actually lead to being put into action. And the other thing that it leads to is people getting stuck, people getting paralyzed, and people just, if you like, overwhelmed by things, and I'm just unable to move forward.
Mm. So I guess it's this idea, this intolerance of uncertainty, of not knowing definitely what's going to happen. And into that space, maybe thinking a lot about things, as you said, maybe making lists, maybe getting more information to try to make something predictable that isn't. Is that maybe fair to say?
Yeah. So I guess we've been working on uncertainty and trying to understand it since 1993.
Okay.
And we'd been talking about it and publishing it for a lot. And then something happened a few years ago, and the rest of the world actually found out that the world was uncertain.
Mm,
And that was the pandemic.
mm,
Because, globally, people had a belief, particularly in Western societies, that we had the resource, that we could plan, that we could predict, that if we said we were going to go on holiday in a particular place on this day, barring weather or things like that, we'd be able to do what we wanted. And suddenly the rest of the world figured out that the world is not actually as certain as we think. And so a lot of what we, at an individual level, most people build up a set of beliefs about the certainties in their life, and actually these are very much contingent on everything else that's happening in the world. So if we remember about toilet paper shortages and things like
mm,
that, so everyone expected that toilet paper would always be available in all shops in all times in the Western world.
mm,
However, you go back a few generations, or you go even a couple of generations, and you go to different places in the world anytime, and that expectation is not there. People use other things, right?
mm,
Rather than the belief in the
mm.
availability of comfortable toilet paper. I'm taking it to a very basic level,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's sort of that level of expectation of predictability about
Mm,
how the world works. And so for people who are particularly find difficult with not knowing what's going to happen, then that's where these things like distress, this rumble in the gut, and these problematic behaviors occur.
mm, mm. And I guess then in terms of, I think it's just a couple of questions that have come in actually in terms of remorse and worries. And maybe just as we're on worry, I might kind of put that one to you. So remorse coming from an incident or an accident that might have caused harm, or potentially probably the person might have worried has caused harm. Um, how might you respond to that? That can be a big one in terms of,
Yeah, so I think um, sometimes we do find forms of obsession and OCD that are around remorse. So things that might have happened, or people feeling responsible for something that happened in the past. And that might be a form of OCD that is dominated by thoughts rather than by behaviors. But often in that case, the person is really, so rather than checking the door, they'll be checking their memory.
mm,
Okay. And so we end up with sort of internal behaviors, cognitive behaviors. So one possibility, we might be slightly more into OCD.
mm,
But the other thing, it's interesting at the moment, one of my current students is looking at regret and
mm,
anticipated regret, and in the context of generalized anxiety disorder. So people are thinking about how they might regret the decisions that they're going to make, And
Mm,
obviously, once those decisions have been made or things have happened, and maybe things that happened because of decisions they didn't make or decisions they did make, then that worry about what might happen,
mm,
and when something has happened, that can turn into regret and remorse in the past. And so we've got these sliding time frames. And so, if you like, we're always in the present, but with people um, and it's important to reflect and to make sense of the past. It's important to plan
mm,
for the future. But what we find is that when people are very distressed, it's often because they're insufficiently present in uh, insufficiently present in the present,
sure.
and they're either too far in the future or too far in the past. And
Mm,
so
mm,
life happens in the present,
yeah.
and we need. There's a thing in research that says there's an optimal time balance
Mm,
in the way that we approach our lives,
mm,
and it's having the right sort of present with enough consideration of the future, enough memory of the past, but it's
mm,
getting that balance right between an enjoyable present, a positive future, and a balanced view of the past.
it sounds optimum, doesn't it? It's
It
a tricky
does,
thing
yeah.
to, it's a tricky
And
thing maybe to hold.
It is, and so it's but a lot of psychological distress is based
Mm,
around this idea of being too much in the future or the past
yeah.
and insufficiently in the present.
Present. And I guess if that's resonating for anyone watching, I suppose through that, even as you say, you're kind of alluding to it there, it's kind of getting that balance right, which is probably going to take a lot of practice. What else might someone do, I suppose, if worry is a major concern for them, or it takes over their life, or as you mentioned earlier, maybe stops them doing the things they want to do?
Yeah, well, I guess one of the things that we find in several of the different models of a generalized anxiety disorder and worry is the idea of distinguishing between genuine problem solving and sort of spinning our wheels in the future. So actually identifying what's going on right now and what can I do about what's going on right now, and using problem solving, seeking support about it, and getting on and doing things. So
Mm,
so it's this so it's the difference between problems that I can identify now and problems that may possibly occur at some unknown point in some unknown way in the future.
mm,
And
mm,
so if we can stay in the closer to the present and the immediate future, that's one of the things we can do. And so
mm,
there's good evidence for problem solving, but it's trying to solve the right things, which is,
mm,
first of all, can I define the problem? Okay. And generally, problems that are definable are ones that are in the present or the immediate future.
yeah.
So that's one of the things.
Yeah. And I guess then you had mentioned that kind of nice description of, certainly more in kind of rumination or depressive conditions, the checking your, or maybe OCD as well, but maybe checking your memory rather than the door. I suppose how might you, what would the research suggest to support people to step out of that, maybe at times more compulsive cycle?
Yeah. So I guess it's what one of the important things, whether it's depressive thinking, whether it's overthinking in OCD or in worry, it's part of it is recognizing the difference between thoughts. These are thoughts. And so part of it is learning to recognize that even though they may seem very real, they are fundamentally a thought. And so and so if it's a thought, then um, it doesn't necessarily and usually doesn't reflect a state of the world, past, present, or future. And so when thoughts are thoughts, then a lot of people use, I guess it comes broadly under changing the relationship with the internal experience.
Yeah.
So obviously, some people find sort of mindful type approaches, outward focus, getting on with life. Okay, so rather than I'm going to spend time sitting down and attending to this and letting it dominate, getting on and doing things in the present. And there's different people find different ways of doing this. So a thought is far less likely to become sticky if we have other things that are important that we're actually doing. And this isn't the same as saying, I've got to be mindful, I've got to be mindful, I've got to be mindful. Because that's that same trying too hard, rather than just recognizing it as a thought. And I'm thinking back to some of the metaphors that people I worked with used, and one of them said, when a thought comes into mind, if I can just quietly close the door on it and move on to something else, that's really helpful. But as soon as I start pushing on that door, it doesn't work. It pushes back. And so it's trying to get this space of recognizing it's there, recognizing it's a thought, recognizing that that thought wants you to engage with it, and saying, no, you know, I'm just going to get on with something that's more important at this point in time. So it's back to the present.
Yeah, and I guess back to a values-led
Back
present.
back to values led. Okay. So rather than worrying about how I show that I care for someone, let's get on and do something that, or do I care enough? Actually get on and do something that is actively caring in the moment.
Yeah, that's a really nice example, actually. Yeah, certainly in terms of worry about other people or their safety, or as you said, their care. And just kind of coming back to that idea, and I know I'm moving between them a little bit, but I suppose one of the key kind of things that cuts across all of it, as you say, is your relationship to the original kind of thought, or maybe the more intrusive thought. So it's not necessarily trying to think positively, or, you know, banishing thoughts or struggling against them. It's about changing your relationship to what comes up. And just on that, there's a question that's come in, which I think kind of maybe speaks a little bit to it. Are intrusive thoughts considered rational thoughts, or is there some truth to them?
It's one of these first define rational. So it's, I guess, one of the examples that we've used is, let's think about Stephen King. Okay, Stephen King is a very successful writer of horror books and all sorts of gruesome things there. So he has a very different attitude to all sorts of weird and horrible thoughts. And so he's, you know, he'll be sitting ready to write a book and he's saying, bring them on. You know, I want something weird, wonderful, crazy, and upsetting and horrible. And so it's so he would welcome those thoughts because for him, they're part of his creative process. Okay. And so it depends on, and what we know is that people with OCD, for example, and people who don't have OCD generally have the same content of intrusive thoughts. There's lots of studies, including some that we've done, that, you know, so the thoughts that people with OCD experience are not different in content to any great degree, apart from the thoughts are different to the thoughts that people who don't have OCD, except they will be more frequent. Okay. And the reason why they're more frequent is because people with OCD engage with them. Okay. So, and so if you have a weird and wonderful thought and say, I wonder why I had that weird and wonderful thought, that's interesting, end of. That, but if you say, "Oh, that's a weird and wonderful thought. I wonder what that says about me. Does this mean that it's not just a weird and wonderful thought? It means I'm a weird person, that I'm potentially a dangerous person, a bad person, and so forth."
So it's, yeah, the meaning that you might attribute to the
Yeah,
thought rather than, I think that's a really important distinction, isn't it? So as you say, a lot of including your own research, the content isn't massively different. And there
no,
might be lots of thoughts that pop into your mind that seem unacceptable or unusual, or maybe not kind of in line with how you see yourself as a person. But if you ascribe a meaning that says, well, that must, what kind of person would think that? There must be something wrong with me. That starts up a battle potentially of trying to get rid of the thought or manage the anxiety that comes with it.
yeah, and that's getting back to recognizing it's a thought,
Yeah.
okay, and it's um, and then uh, staying in the moment, and basically getting on with whatever you were trying to do before you had that thought.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so staying in the present, other than spiraling into the future or going into the past, or trying to because the overthinking is often it's the response to the original thought.
Mm.
So if it's a worry, what if, what if, what if?
Yeah.
So start going spiraling into the future, then saying, well, the alternative is, well, this is the issue of the moment. I'm going to deal with the issue of the moment.
Mm.
And if that ever happens at some unknown point and probably in some unknown way in the future, I'll deal with that when I get there.
Mm. Mm. So coming, yeah, so that kind of present focus
Yeah.
is key, isn't it? And I guess there's another question in there in terms of how you might support somebody who has OCD, and we touched a little on that before this
Yeah.
webinar. What might be helpful? I guess where we offer a lot of support to friends and family. So I guess it's thinking what's useful in terms of supporting someone who might really feel quite distressed by these thoughts or the reactions to them.
I think the most important thing, and this is where some of the research has come out, and there's been thinking has changed on this over the last decade or 2 decades. And first of all, there needs to be a compassionate response. So
Mm,
if people are asking for reassurance, if
mm,
they're asking for um, wanting people to do things for them, so uh, for many years, there was the idea that people should not get involved. Okay.
mm,
And and that made it very problematic for both family members and the person who was there. The important thing is how you get involved. Okay. Um, and so this is where the compassionate response. So when people are asking for reassurance, they're trying to avoid things, they want things done for them. This comes from a place of distress, not from a place of manipulation.
mm,
Okay. It's the distress that is this really strong pull. And it's really needs to be understood as I need some help here. And then the question is, how is that help provided? And this essentially, I'm here for you. Would you like a hug? Um, I understand this is really difficult for you. And so it's providing that support and at the same time encouraging the person, as we say, to stay in the moment and get on with what they need to do. Well, no, what's really important now is to help you get to school or get to
mm.
work or get out of the house. And
Yeah.
I'm going to help you do this. Okay. Um, and it's that, um, and not getting into the the battles around things. So one of the things with OCD is a metaphor that I've used many times over the years, which some people have probably seen. It's the secret life of the dragon slayer. And it's like the person with OCD is a dragon slayer, and they go out day after day, and the only person who can see the dragons is the dragon slayer. And dragon slayers need support. It's a hard job. And so it's having that support to the understanding that it's really difficult, it's really distressing, that people are there to help them, but there may be some limits. Well, no, it's not limits, but there are more helpful ways and there are less helpful ways. But one of the most helpful ways is to provide support, sometimes practical, but always emotional.
Yeah. So the compassionate response, as you say, emotional support in terms of the distress that comes with
Yes.
it, and the kind of practical piece of what needs to happen now. Maybe it's, as you say,
Yeah.
kind of getting out to school or to work. And I think that maybe, hopefully that answered one of the questions there about someone's asking, should friends and family agree with the intrusive thoughts, or should they gently remind them of what is in the present?
I think I wouldn't say that people need to agree with the intrusive thoughts, but they can empathize with the experience of how upsetting the intrusive thought is.
Yeah.
So it's not about its truth or otherwise by any objective standards,
Sure.
but they can empathize with, at that point in time, that thought appears very real, and it may appear as if true, but it's not about agreeing or disagreeing with it. It's just recognizing how it is for the person.
Yeah, and the impact, as you say.
Yes.
And there's an interesting question here, which we had mentioned a little bit before as well. Someone's asking, was GAD considered as depression or anxiety, or is there a bit of both going on? They're certainly related.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. What I would say is when we talk about the co-occurrence of two different things, we talk about comorbidity. And so the co-occurrence of anxiety and depression, generalized anxiety and depression, the comorbidity is probably highest between those two than anything else. And so what we tend to see is that a lot of time people come into services with a diagnosis of this person is currently depressed. And in a significant number of cases, we'll find out that there is a long history of generalized anxiety disorder. And so people get worn out and then they become depressed.
Okay.
And so it might be because someone's been generalized anxiety disorder for a long time, and then there's an event that happens that, if you like, is the straw that there's a setback and that triggers depression, or that people just get worn out. And so the worries are taking up more and more space. There's people are doing fewer and fewer things that are nourishing for them. They're just getting caught up in worry. And when that balance between positive things and just the grind and the fatigue and so forth, that's often when the depression occurs. And we see a lot of people who seek help and come into services. They may have been dealing with GAD for a very long time, but it's often when the depression occurs that they end up consulting or seeking help.
Yeah, so it's, yeah. And I guess then, and I suppose it's probably then about, well, there's these kind of ways of thinking maybe kind of go across different conditions, don't they? So maybe it's about kind of working on that relationship to thoughts. In terms of that model of uncertainty, what do you kind of suggest from the research of how people, if that resonates, or that's kind of what might people do to kind of increase their capacity to tolerate the unknown or the gray areas?
Well, one of the things that we figured out quite early is that all therapies that work pretty much for anything, and this is both the good news, but it's also what makes it difficult, is you either have to stop doing one of the things that you're doing, or you have to start doing something that you don't usually do. All effective therapies probably come down to needing to change the way that you act. And so one of the things that we need to do for uncertainty is to get into situations with little bits of uncertainty and not doing what we normally do. So one of the first things, I remember someone many, many years ago who was a real champion warrior, would spend hours and hours and hours trying to buy the perfect birthday card. Okay. And it would take ages and ages and ages. And it became a very distressing experience. And they sometimes ended up not not getting the card on time to the person, and they felt really bad about that. So what they were trying to do was to get the most thoughtful birthday card and worrying about how it would be understood. And then the impact was they didn't get round to it. And so obviously what that person would do is they would go to multiple shops and spend hours looking at different birthday cards and what was on the picture and what was in the words, and then would really overthink it. And so that's what that person would normally do. So what that person we got them doing was to go in, and that wasn't the most serious thing they worried about. No, that was just part of their overall sort of intolerance of uncertainty that would lead to worry, and give themselves 5 minutes. Okay, so rather than spending hours and hours and hours, find a good enough birthday card in 5 minutes, go home. And so that's doing the opposite of spending lots and lots of time.
And I guess then they probably left with that feeling of doubt that it's going to be the next one, isn't it? So what would support them then in kind of riding that out, that feeling?
Well, they are an expert birthday card chooser. Okay, so they have looked at more birthday cards and read more of them and seen more of them than just about anyone else in the world. So the chances are that it's going to be a bad one is very, very low.
Okay.
It may not be the absolute most perfect tailored birthday card, but it's going to be good enough.
Yeah.
Okay, and so it's trying to get that cost benefit. So for someone who overdoes things, they need to do less. It doesn't mean to go and get a really unthoughtful, tacky card that's likely to offend someone, because that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then for someone who gets stuck, sorry. So for someone who is really feeling paralyzed, okay, and is unable to do anything, then it's really a case of how do we get them at least engaging with it.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's doing the opposite of what the person feels inclined to do. So if I'd rather not go there because it's just too overwhelming, it's going to be how do I dip my toe in the water?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't mean you have to go full in. So you know it's a bit like getting into cold water. You don't have to dive in, but you can at least dip your toe.
Okay. And I guess to kind of practice it, isn't it?
Yeah,
Of that kind
it
of
is.
it's a practice rather than an inherent skill that you either have or don't have. You can build it.
And the important thing is you start off with things that are not really central. You know, so you don't try that out on your worst worry. You try it because what we know is that people who are intolerant of uncertainty, as soon as you get them out of their established way of doing things, these grumbling feelings become aware.
Yeah.
So people become aware of them. And one of the things, people who are intolerant of uncertainty, if they're able to go to restaurants, they're likely to go to the same restaurant and order the same thing.
Mm.
Okay. And the way to break that is you either go to the same restaurant and order something different, or you go to a different restaurant and order the same dish, but from a different restaurant.
Mm. Mm.
And that's enough for people who are
Yeah.
really intolerant of
Mm.
uncertainty to start to recognize that that feeling, that grumbly feeling, just means I don't know what's going to happen, and it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that something awful is going to happen.
Yeah. That's really key as well, isn't it? So it's more
Mm,
a reflection of I don't know what's coming as opposed to I feel bad, so it must mean something bad is happening
yeah,
or will happen. And I need to do
yeah,
something to get rid of that or to stop that happening. It's quite central, isn't it?
and that's what we would call in our current team making friends with uncertainty.
Yeah. So if
Um,
you were to say the kind of the restaurant one's a really good example. If you were to say
mm,
the kind of top three ways to make friends with uncertainty for someone who does know that they worry or maybe ruminates, or I guess it's more so worry and intrusive thinking, what would you say?
well, I would say the first thing that we do in the treatments that we use,
Mm,
that we've developed, um, child, most of what we know about uncertainty is learned in childhood.
mm,
Okay. And most of where people who are tolerant of uncertainty, a lot of this has been developed through play. This might
okay.
seem really counterintuitive. So
Mm,
we get people playing pop-up pirate. And
mm,
or it could be Buckaroo, or it could be any other game where you know exactly what's going to happen, but you don't know
mm,
when.
mm,
So there's no uncertainty about the outcome, but there is uncertainty about when it's going to happen. And what we know is when we start engaging with games like that, or it could be Snap, or it could be anything that's not based on skill, it's just
yeah,
based on chance,
sure.
uh, um, that those feelings will be elicited, and we can start to see, okay, this feeling that I'm getting now
Mm,
is because I don't know when something is going to happen. Okay. So one thing is to start to recognize those feelings for what they are. Okay. And we think increasingly a playful approach can be helpful to that.
mm,
Okay. And anyone can do that. Um, so anything that is based on chance, where there's nothing bad is going to happen, and you know what the outcome is going to be, you just don't know when. That's the
yeah,
perfect one.
sure.
So that's the first thing. Recognize these feelings for what they are.
And I guess getting more contact with them, having, yeah, so
Yeah,
more getting more
yeah,
used to them. So feeling
yeah.
them. Yeah,
And so repeat. So
yeah.
get a really strong sense of what that feeling is in
Mm,
isolation. Then start to do the sort of thing that we're talking
yeah,
about, which is doing things in real life where
yeah,
nothing really big is at stake,
yeah.
but it's just going to be that gets people outside of their comfort zone. Um, and then so that would be the sort of thing we were talking about with the restaurant.
Mm,
Yeah, or one of the things that we did during the pandemic when people were allowed their exercise and people very quickly got into routines for their hour
mm,
a day exercise.
mm,
So they would go around the same route in the same direction. We'd say, toss a coin, heads go left, tails go right.
mm,
Okay, so it was the same route, but it had taken that,
sure.
it had brought the uncertainty into it. So really small changes like that.
Yeah,
And then the third thing would be the sort of thing I talked about earlier with the birthday card. You do
yeah,
the opposite of if it takes you 2 hours to buy a birthday card, do it in 5 minutes.
Yeah. And what would you say to the person who says, but I want to do the 5 minutes, but I can't? I literally cannot stop myself looking, continuing to choose.
So I would say in that case, go back for something that has got the same things, but you're not so invested in,
Okay. Yeah.
because there will be other examples of the same pattern, but 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 you'll be able, and often the way that we've started doing it is sort of bringing an element of uncertainty into equally positive choices.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, buy 3 birthday cards,
Mm.
however you want to do it, and then bring the element of chance into which one you send.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
So I guess it's lowering the stakes, isn't it? So it's,
it
as you
is,
were saying
yes.
earlier, it's kind of dipping your toe into, you don't have to submerge yourself in
No,
something completely uncertain or risky. It's building that skill up maybe with
yeah,
things that are important but not
yeah,
pivotal maybe.
yeah.
And I guess I know we're kind of coming to the end now, Mark. I suppose it's, and thank you for all the questions, everyone that you've submitted. So thanks for sharing them, and my apologies if we haven't got to all of them. Hopefully we've got to the kind of main themes around them. There's just maybe one last one, I think, because it's come up a few times in the comments about um I suppose someone who might kind of be, someone might think this person is worrying a lot, um, but maybe doesn't have insight or awareness of it. How might a loved one support them in that? I think you've kind of maybe alluded to it a little bit earlier, but
Yeah, so it one of the issues is because we've said um, that people worry about things that are of great value to them.
mm,
And so as people over engage with the things they worry about, then that means that sometimes their behavior can be seen as um, overwhelming, as insistent, can sometimes be seen as controlling.
mm,
And so I would say it would be important for the person who's concerned about the person to first of all recognize not that they are right to worry so much, but you understand why the thing that they're worrying about is so important to them.
mm,
So it's recognizing the value behind the worry. So if you're always, if someone is always on it, the children to do their homework or do more of this or do less of that, and it comes across as unhelpful
mm,
and unwanted and can cause conflicts, it's to recognize that the the value is not about control. The value is about wanting the best for the children.
mm,
And so starting with that, and that's the point of entry.
yeah,
So it's a bit like with obsessions, it's recognizing the distress.
mm,
So, and in with worry like that, it's recognizing the value that's
yeah,
underlying it. So I can see that the children are really important to you.
mm,
I can see that you're doing all that you can, that you're very concerned about this or that. Um, okay. It, and then is there another way that we can approach the thing
mm,
that's really important, which is, in this case, the children?
yeah. So distilling it down to the thing that's driving it as opposed to
Yeah,
some of the
yeah.
more the behaviors around it, I think. Yeah, no, that's really
And
helpful.
so then it's not about the bad things that might happen. It's
Mm,
about the good things that we want to happen.
yeah. Yeah. Or that matter to us, or yeah,
Yes,
that we would want
yes,
to invest in maybe.
yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So, Mark, thanks so much for all of your responses to the questions and kind of sharing that overview of that intolerance of uncertainty. I know it kind of often is as the ways we kind of come to the end. We could definitely speak for a lot longer. So hopefully it's kind of planted some seeds of interest for people, maybe slightly different ways at looking at some of this. And in terms of the questions, as I said, thank you all for submitting them. Just maybe a note on one of them who was kind of concerned about who's getting help and not wanting things to get worse. So thank you for sharing that. I'd really kind of recommend maybe kind of speaking to the person that you are meeting with, a therapist, or seeking additional support from your GP, or kind of connecting out if you feel that you need it. Really, really important. Because I guess things can spiral. We kind of have that awareness when they do. So it's really helpful to kind of come along to this webinar, but also kind of seeking that additional support. And Mark, you might have an idea about some references, but certainly our website, aware.ie, will have a bit more information, certainly on the depression pieces. Anxiety Ireland has a bit more information as well as OCD UK is a good website as well. I often
Very
would
good
have
website.
recommended people. It's so good in terms of what they have there.
Yeah.
So do have a look if there's any of that that's of interest. And Mark, maybe kind of two kind of things to kind of finish on with you. I guess just thinking about the wealth of your time researching this, even since '93, and I suppose what for you is kind of been, I guess that what I mentioned at the beginning of kind of really wanting to refine interventions to make sure it works for people so they can kind of exit these cycles of suffering and distress, which can be really, really awful, kind of getting stuck in those kind of thinking loops. What do you think is the most important thing that you've found out, or that you'd want people to know, maybe based on your work?
I guess there's a reason why we have at least 9 different models of worry. Okay. And I think there are some common underlying processes, which is some of the things that I've talked about today. And things that work are things that help people change their experience of internal events, whether it's a feeling, whether it's that grumble, whether it's a thought, okay? And that ultimately therapies that work help people, I'm going to say it again, start doing things that they don't normally do, or stop doing things that they usually do. And the key to that, I think, is sort of staying in the present and just getting on with it's not living in the moment in a very shallow way. It's about profoundly living in the moment and doing things that are of value.
Yeah. That's a nice way to describe it. Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much, Mark, for this afternoon. Really, really appreciate your time and your experience, and hopefully it's been of use to everyone watching. So thank you again. So moving on.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, go on.
That's all right. Just thank you for the questions.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for the questions that you've asked. As I said, hopefully we've gotten to most of them. Do have a look at the other resources after. And so moving on to the webinar for next month. So it'll be the 13th of August, and looking at psychosexual health and depression. So please do join us for that if that's of interest. And just to say thank you all again. And Mark, thank you very much.